When selecting a landing site, different types of terrain will present various challenges and require different considerations. Here are some things to think about for each different type of terrain.
A plateau is usually an open area, and so generally it's a pretty good place to land.
Approaches and departures are normally unrestricted and similar to any other landing at lower altitudes.
You're coming into hover over snow, so what are you going to expect? Maybe some blowing snow?
Blowing snow, and we're going to sink into the snow a little bit.
And just easing down now, gently, expecting a slope, and if there's not one, we'll be pleasantly surprised. Just gently forward down, picking your landing site now.
Okay, got a nice smooth spot there, just gently down. Tail rotor's clear. Let's bring it down nice.
That's very nice.
Okay, and just pumping a little bit just to break through the crust if there is any. I think that's pretty solid there actually.
That's good. Well done.
Open tussock country above the tree line presents good landing opportunities. However, the actual landing position requires careful selection because the clumpy nature of the vegetation masks the actual surface of the ground, sometimes making it difficult to achieve a firm, stable landing.
And there's often occasions where you can land and you have to feel the helicopter down very gently and feel whether it feels stable. If it doesn't, well then obviously you have to move or shift or lift and take off and find another spot. So we're going to come and land down here. You've selected your spot. You notice it's quite hard to see the ground because of the vegetation.
Yeah.
So let's just start easing forward and in there and do the best you can.
Sloping quite a lot.
Okay, so let's just come down, be accurate, put your skids exactly where you want them to go, where you indicate or you think the best spot is out there, gently touching down, and tell me if you like it or not. No, didn't like that at all, did you? That wasn't very nice at all. So just need to be gentle. Just come down there now and just ease it down, just feeling it. Okay, just feeling it, looking out front, expect a slope there, just there. Do you like it?
No.
No. Okay. Not a good spot to land.
No.
So let's not do it. Okay. The other danger that can occur in high tussocks, especially in the summertime, is that sometimes the exhaust on helicopters can set fire to them. And that's just an added complication. But basically, the biggest problem is finding level ground within the tussocks themselves.
Rounded knolls or hilltops are normally even, non-sloping ground. Wind direction and strength are easy to detect and will have laminar flow. Provided the knoll is nicely rounded, there is little chance of turbulence even in strong wind.
Any wind that will be flowing over that rounded knob will be reasonably smooth because it's not like it's a sharp jagged peak going to create a lot of turbulence.
Approach speeds can be difficult to assess.
When you're landing on flat ground, you've got ground coming past you, whereas on a rounded knoll, you've got nothing coming past you, so it's a little bit harder to judge your approach speed.
If the ground is not level, landing slightly beyond the brow will place the heels of the skids on higher ground than the toes, effectively putting the helicopter in a safe nose-low position, reducing the likelihood of the helicopter tipping backwards and the tail rotor striking the ground. When approaching a saddle, you should endeavour to work out the prevailing wind direction to establish the best landing approach. Level ground can usually be found somewhere in a saddle. Wind tends to increase due to the Venturi effect between higher ground either side.
Because of the Venturi effect, or the forcing of air through a narrow pass, that wind can increase in velocity hugely. It's when there's light winds, generally less than 10 knots, makes it a little bit hard to work out which is the right way. And one technique that we use is to fly one way and set it up as an approach, assess the ground speed versus the airspeed, and then go around and fly it the other way and assess the ground speed versus the airspeed, and work out and determine through the sort of the seat of the pants feel whether one felt better than the other. You utilise the GPS if you want to see if there's any difference in ground speed versus airspeed, but really that's only an aid. You want to do it by sort of visual references. So it's just gently fly on by, and now looking for little clues on the tussock, on the grass, to see if we can see any indication of wind.
There's hardly any movement on the tussocks down there at all, actually.
Okay, we'll go and try exactly the same approach from the opposite direction. Did you sense there that translation came slightly earlier while we were still moving forward? So I think you had a slight wind up your tail then.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we recircuit now and we'll do an approach from our original first direction. Very nice. That's good.
In a saddle, rising ground either side may compromise rotor blade clearance, so caution should be exercised if disembarking.
If you watch a seagull soaring the ridges, you'll find that they don't sort of set up a big long final approach onto a ridge. They will soar along the side of the ridge in the updrafting wind and then just do a little, 90-degree turn and come plop and land on the ridge.
If the wind is blowing at right angles to a ridge, considerable turbulence will be experienced on the downwind side, making a conventional approach into wind difficult.
And as we coming in here, you may start to feel a little bit of turbulence coming off the ridge because it's at right angles to the airflow coming towards us. The sharper that ridge, the more turbulence that you would be likely to experience.
As an alternative, the updrafting air on the upwind side can be utilised by flying along the ridge, offsetting drift with yaw, turning into wind when the landing site is approached and the helicopter passes through translation. This method can save large amounts of power and also has the advantage of having more overshoot options.
You think that's probably too far, but as you touch now, see that feels quite level.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're sitting out over the edge of the ridge. But remember, most of the weight of the helicopter is on the heels of the skid, so the heels need to be on the good part of the ridge. Even if the toes are just slightly downhill, it'll feel much better than falling backwards.
Following the ridge line, it means you know exactly where you're coming in to land. It's much easier to find the landing spot, and the wing gives you a great deal of help to maintain your lift. You're hardly using as much power, and it's a nice, gentle, steady approach.
In bush country, creeks and rivers may provide the only clear area in which to land. The best landing site is level ground on sandy or gravel beaches. Landing on damp or wet ground is preferable to dry ground to avoid blowing dust around. Blowing dust will cause damage to the helicopter, particularly the rotor blades. Positively identify a touchdown point if you are landing. The helicopter footprint will become more familiar as your experience on type increases.
You'll have to be quite accurate where you place the skids. Where do you want the tail?
I want my tail as far into that as possible.
So the tail over that clear area there?
Yeah.
So move the helicopter forward and put your skids
Tail rotor is
exactly
clear.
where you want to with a nice little zero-speed landing. Very nice. Well done.
The accurate placement of the skids on a particular spot requires practice.
Hooking up a skid is the last thing that you want to have happen, because the general tendency is once a skid is hooked up, the pilot will tend to get a fright and want to pull the helicopter straight off the ground, resulting in dynamic rollover, which is where the helicopter just rolls straight over before he can even blink his eye.
Backing up can be dangerous because of the lack of visibility. If it has to be done, a slightly higher hover than normal is recommended to give good tail rotor clearance.
Just like reversing in your car, you need to know it's clear before you reverse backwards. So we need to turn quietly. How are you going to do it? You need to turn the tail to your clear side. Is it clear out your side there?
It is clear.
So just turn the tail out round there until you can see the area that you want to back up to.
Clear there.
Right, and we have a look now. That's quite good behind us there, isn't it? Okay?
Yep.
Reversing was a manoeuvre that I absolutely hated. I certainly wouldn't want to do it without Simon sat next to me.
Here are some tips to help reduce your likelihood of getting lost in the mountains, or to help confirm your position should you ever become disoriented on a flight. Be aware of the alignment of valleys relative to the compass.
GPS is an important tool for verifying one's positions. It shouldn't be the only tool.
Which way is back to the airfield?
We were heading on a roughly southerly heading as we came into this valley system, and now we're heading roughly north on the way back out.
Which way is the river flowing?
I can see it quite clearly below us. It's flowing the same direction that we're flying in, so we should be heading in the right direction.
Downstream means to larger rivers, lakes, the sea, towns, other features that allow us to orient ourselves.
Significant white water in a stream indicates a steep gradient. Note the position of the sun when entering a valley. Compare this to the sun position when you leave the valley. If you haven't spent much time in the valley, it should give you an accurate reference point.
Okay, any other clues as to your direction?
Well, the sun was behind us as we came in, and now it's directly in front of us, so that was another clue.
That would make sense.
Knowing where we are on our chart starts right back at the planning stages. Far too big a map now for in the cockpit, isn't it?
It is.
So let's make it a functional size. We don't want to be head down in the cockpit, we need to be head up. Folding the chart into a manageable size so that we can hold it in our left hand whilst holding the control column. Glance at the chart. You can see now you have the operating area there. So you'll be able to sit here with your finger on the map and follow your path as you go around it. Therefore, still maintaining peripheral vision for our lookout, our proximity to terrain, and our maintenance of the control of the aircraft's attitude.
There are a number of difficulties associated with flying in the mountains. Each of these can affect your performance as a pilot. There is a high workload while mountain flying. Therefore, good management of the aircraft and your passengers is important to reduce stress levels and enhance sound decision making. Flying in turbulence will add to your fatigue and may nauseate you.
It's important to anticipate where you expect it to be, and therefore to be able to give your passengers some anticipation of the ride that they're going to experience.
And say, look, we are going to get a few bumps here. It's quite okay. Put your seatbelts on. This is quite normal for these conditions. Keep a calm demeanour and look as though you know what you're doing.
That gives them some confidence in your competence.
Know when to turn back so you don't have to fly while fighting off air sickness. Remember that flight between 10,000 and 13,000 feet is allowed for a maximum of 30 minutes without oxygen. Below 10,000 feet, if you are healthy, you should not be significantly affected by hypoxia. However, if you are unwell or a smoker, you will be more susceptible. Even between 5,000 and 8,000 feet, your brain will generally not work as efficiently as it does at sea level.
One of the symptoms of hypoxia is a feeling of euphoria.
And the other one is the nails on their hands turning blue.
Look for the symptoms of hypoxia in your passengers, as you are unlikely to recognise them in yourself.
If they're exhibiting any symptoms of hypoxia, then be alerted to the fact that quite likely then you will be also.
The higher you fly, the drier the air, so be alert to dehydration. Glare is also greater with altitude. Reflections occur from cloud and snow-covered terrain. Wear sunglasses to combat this. When using cabin heat, regularly check the carbon monoxide detector to ensure there are no gases leaking into the cockpit. A clean windscreen is very important. Be aware that rain on the windscreen can affect your visual judgment.
If you suddenly have to auto-rotate, do you try and stretch it to go to a valley floor, or do you accept where you are there and now and put it down as best you can on the unsuitable terrain right around you?
When flying in the mountains, your options for an auto-rotational landing are very limited. There's a high possibility that no open or flat ground will be available. The wind direction, strength and turbulence will also affect your options. Always remember the golden rule. A good auto-rotation to a bad spot is preferable to a bad auto-rotation to a good spot.
Everything was to go quiet and we needed to auto-rotate. What would you do?
I'd probably go down, try to go down to the valley.
Right, but as we get closer to the hill here, what would you do now? You just have to go, well, I'll just do one straight here and do the best I can.
Yeah.
So that is the situation that will be a horrible decision to make. We've got engine failure now, so let's enter auto-rotation. Adjust the RPM, and you notice the RPM goes a little bit higher at higher altitude.
Yep.
So you've got to just adjust that slightly, get the speed organised, and now, where are you going to go? What do you think? Down along there?
Yeah.
Good, that's looking good. At about treetop height, about there, start to flare, keep flaring as long as we can to our desired landing speed, which is quite slow on this gravel, forward and cushioning the landing onto the ground. Very good, well done. How did that feel?
Very smooth. It's great.
Must be the pilot.
It must be, or the instructor.
It would be very difficult to achieve a successful auto-rotational landing downhill, as you would not be able to flare hard enough due to the downsloping terrain. If possible, flare uphill and cushion onto the side of the hill. Facing uphill will also reduce the likelihood of the helicopter rolling over backwards.
One of the dangers of mountain flying is that it's all very nice in the cockpit of the helicopter with a heater on. But when you get out there in the biting cold wind in that very hostile environment, it can kill you.
Before venturing into the mountains, dress appropriately and make sure that your aircraft survival kit is fully stocked. Be aware of the contents and how they can best be used. Remember the principles of survival: location, water, food and shelter, and at all times maintain your will to survive.
You can see there's a bit of snow and precipitation there. You need to be making the assertive decisions to turn back. Pushing on is going to force you into a reactive situation. That's when you are least likely to do the right things, make the right decisions.
At first, sit on a bloody hillside, stay there in a complete machine, although it was cold, then risk getting up there and bending it.
Just remember, it's not the mountains that are dangerous, it's only the pilots that are dangerous.
Poor decision making or inappropriate decisions, lack of decisions, the mountains are unforgiving of.
One of the most difficult things about mountain flying is you don't know what you don't know until you've experienced it for the first time. Unless your first experience is under controlled conditions with an appropriately qualified instructor to guide you, you could get yourself into a situation that you don't have the skills to get out of. The minimum instructor requirements for teaching terrain awareness and basic mountain flying can be found in the Mountain Flying Training Standards Guide, produced by the CAA. The minimum requirements for helicopter instructors can be found in AC 6118.
It's a matter of getting the appropriate training and therefore being able to make the appropriate decisions in order to survive and enjoy the environment.
It does get easier as you practice things. Having an instructor there to remind you, you need that to start with, but then once your brain sort of picks it up, you start to remind yourself about things.
Just because you learn to fly in some small mountains in one place doesn't mean to say that you can tackle the large ones somewhere else. and there is absolutely no substitute for experience.
If anyone's there thinking, should I go for advanced mountain training? I would say go for it. You'll challenge yourself, you'll learn new skills that you can apply to your other flying environments, and it will just make you a much better pilot.
You're always learning. It's a classic environment where if you think you've finished learning, it's time to put your boots up and stop flying.
Mountain flying can be summed up with 4 simple principles: horizon, position, options, and anticipation. If we can superimpose an imaginary horizon on any variable terrain, then we can reference the aircraft to where we need it to be. Always putting ourselves in the appropriate position, whether it be in a valley, in a saddle crossing, such that we have options. We always have the escape route available to us. And we do those because we anticipate. Given that, we can enjoy and survive flying in the mountains.
Practicing mountain flying will make the things you learn through good instruction a permanent part of your skill set. Think about the tips you have learned from this DVD and revisit it from time to time. Apply what you have learned so that you and your passengers can safely enjoy the pleasures of mountain flying over a long and happy flying career.